Okay, so let's go to the Consumer Affairs 226 Research Guide. And what we're going to be focusing on here is evaluating resources, some sources that you might want to use, how to find statistics. Those are the main things we're going to focus on for this class. Evaluating resources is something that all consumers need to do for anything they read or use. For websites, one way to do that is to make sure there is an About page. If a website does not have an About page, it's very sketchy. There's an acronym to help you remember how to evaluate sources, and that's called CRAP, C-R-A-P. And that stands for currency, reliability, authority, and purpose. So let's take a couple minutes to go through those. Is the information timely? I tell you, if there's nothing else we've learned during the COVID pandemic, it's that timely resources are important. You didn't want to see statistics from March or April or treatments discussed in March or April. So you want to look on a website or a document for either the last updated date or a copyright. Reliability. Unless you found the resource in the library, you have experience with the source, or were referred to the source by somebody you know who's knowledgeable, the answer to reliability generally relies on authority and purpose. Here's a clue. If the document contains research, does it include data and an explanation of the research methods used to gather data? Having those is also the sign of an academic or scholarly article, which your faculty members, your professors will often want you to use. Authority. Who wrote it? Who put it together? Who produced it? Who published it? What are their credentials? Does the author list their sources? Do they cite references? Purpose. This is an important one. What kind of website is it? Is it from a government agency, in other words, .gov? From a university, .edu? A nonprofit organization, .org? Is it a commercial website, .com? Does the website include advertising? And if so, are the ads clearly identified? Ads are not necessarily mean that the website isn't reliable. It's just that it has a commercial component to it, and you want to make sure the ads are clearly identified. Is the information on the website fact or opinion? If it's opinion, does the author acknowledge various points of view? Is the author trying to push an agenda? Let's take an example of 4 sources on COVID. We have a .gov, a .edu, a .com, and a .org. Let's start with the .gov. Okay, this comes from the Centers for Disease Control, which was and is the primary government agency that is dealing with COVID and coming up with recommendations. However, if we look at what the date on this research is, this was published on April 14th, 2020. And as you know, there has been much research put out since April 14th. One of the things that makes it credible is it tells you what its currency is, okay? And it's also from a government agency. Now let's try a .edu. Okay, Johns Hopkins University is probably the leading university on coronavirus, and they've put together a dashboard which is very up to date. It's also very heavy on data. And it tells you, I believe, it's last updated September 6th, 2020. Now, I don't know when you're watching this, but I put this up on September 6th, so this was current as of the day I put it up. Let's try .org. Okay, this comes from Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a nonprofit. Okay? We all know that Wikipedia can be very helpful. We also know that Wikipedia can be edited by just about anybody. So here, what's important, we could look at about, but here what's important is we want to look at the source of this information. Who put this together? And what it tells you here is that the page has been protected, so that other people can't come in and edit it, all right? It doesn't tell you exactly where the data came from, but it does give you the history of the page. The next we're going to go to is .com. And this is Abbott Laboratories. And this is a drug company that is trying to make, they're big in COVID testing. I don't think they're also big in vaccines. But they're a for-profit company. So you have to be careful here. Now, there is an about, okay, that's great. If we look at, say, a news alert, hopefully it will have a date on it. And this has a date of September 1st, okay? So that gives you an example of how the different types of sources can affect the material that is there. And we checked for their currency, their reliability, their authority, and their purpose, ever so briefly. The next thing we want to do is we want to use OneSearch. This is a very easy search box and search engine that's on the library homepage. It searches about 90% of the library's resources. That's its pluses. The minuses are that it's not as sophisticated a tool for refining your resources. It's somewhat like Google in that you get lots and lots and lots of results, and it's just a little bit harder to accurately or to precisely refine them. But we're going to try the search that was in the Getting Started page, and that is student debt, and, if you remember, and should be all caps, wealth inequality. And we're going to search everything. We're also going to sign in because that will give us more tools and access to more materials. You sign in using your Beach ID and your password. And here we see we got 47,507 results. So we have, however, we haven't used all of the terms that we might use for debt, student debt. It might be, authors may have written about student loans. So I'm going to put in student loans. And because we have it all in one search box here, I'm going to put parentheses around the concept of student debt or student loans and wealth inequality. So we're saying for this concept, we'll take either of these terms, and then we want it matched with wealth inequality. So this should increase our number of results. And it did. It increased it to 64,000. So that means it was good that we added that, because there's a lot of articles or books about student loans and wealth inequality that we would have been missing. Now, one of the ways that we can limit our research or filter it is we're going to put quotation marks around wealth inequality, because that's a fairly good established term. And we're going to okay, so I don't know quite why. Okay, so that lowered it from 64,000 down to 4,500. That seems like a big reduction, but that means that many of them did not have that phrase, wealth inequality. The next thing that we're going to do to filter our results is we're going to go over here to the left to the various filters. And the first thing I suggest you do is you look at the date. We probably don't need things back to 1930. So I'm going to change this to 2000, the last 20 years. Sometimes your professors will ask you to have research within a certain period of time. That knocked out a little bit, but not too much. You might want to take a look at books, because books and book chapters can be very useful to get an overview of a topic. So I'm going to look at book chapters. Wealth inequality in the United States, student debt effects on financial well-being, comparing trends in personal wealth inequality around the world. There's quite a bit here on wealth inequality, and presumably student debt or student loans is mentioned in that. I'm going to take the filter of book chapters off. And next I'm going to look for scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles. And that reduces it to 1,229 articles. Okay, so here, full text available. If you click on that, it's going to tell you where the full text is within the library system. It's in a database called Project Muse. You can also get an APA citation. You know, it's a computer-generated citation, so you have to be very careful about things like capitalization. And as you can see here, this is not accurate, but it's at least something to start with. You can also email it to yourself, print it. Things I highly recommend that you do. Not printing, but highly recommend that you email it to yourself so you don't lose a copy of the article. So this is the basic way that you use OneSearch. And as I said, there is a video on the 226 research guide that will go into a little bit more detail.